Hello and welcome to the second part to What If Itadori Had the Rinnegan. Now the feedback on the first part was pretty decent, I'm not gonna lie. So here is part 2. This actually might be coming out a little late because I don't really get to record during weekdays, mainly because of school and whatnot. But nevertheless, I hope this comes out at a decent time. Now I don't want to make this intro too long, but like always, my Discord and everything is linked in the description below and all that. Also, just again, thank you for the feedback on the first video. And let's get into the second part to What If Itadori Had the Rinnegan. Alright, now where I left off, Jogo had got his ass whooped by Gojo, much like in canon, and Gojo had brung Itadori to come fight Jogo. Now Jogo would question Gojo if he was trying to get this kid killed, and Gojo, much like in canon, would tell Jogo that he shouldn't underestimate Yuji, and also Yuji could hold back and he would probably still beat him. As then Gojo would say, in short terms, you're kinda weak. And Jogo would literally be fuming after hearing this. But Jogo would clear his head as he would remember something that he was told by Geto about Itadori. He told him that Itadori was a huge asset to them, as if they got him on their side, no one could stop them. In fact, he was even more valuable than getting Sukuna, which was originally their plan, but they had no vessel for Sukuna. Geto would tell Jogo and the rest of the Disaster Curses that they should try to tempt Itadori onto their side and they should not harm him. Geto would also tell the Disaster Curses that Gojo and Itadori were cut from the exact same cloth. They were both one of a kind. As then he would tell them that Itadori had insane growth potential in terms of power. Meaning if they left him unattended for even a little bit of time, which they have actually already done, Yuji could obtain power close to Gojo, meaning they would have 2 Gojos running around and they did not have 2 prison realms. So if they could not get Yuji on their side, they would have to eliminate him immediately before he obtained the power to eliminate them. And one last thing was told to the Disaster Curses by Geto, and that was Yuji was extremely dangerous. And that was not because he was super strong or anything, it was because he had the ability to ruin their entire plan. If he got hold of one of their souls, the plan would be completely ruined. As when he takes somebody's soul, he takes all of their memories, experience, and everything they have ever heard, saw, or felt. So if they ever got into a fight with Yuji, and they were going to lose, they should try to flee at all costs. Because if Yuji gets a hold of their soul, he gets a hold of their mind, which means he gets a hold of their plan. And Geto, or if you want me to call him who he actually is, Kinjaku, would really solidify the fact to the Disaster Curses that the eyes that Yuji had separated him from cursed spirits and humans. They made him a god. So he was nothing to be trifled with in terms of combat. But back over to the fight, Jogo and Itadori would stare each other down as they were preparing to fight. But Itadori would turn back toward Gojo and he would tell him to go back to the road. He wanted him completely out of the woods, because if he got into a bad situation, he would have to use his trump card, and his trump card had quite a bit of range. Itadori would tell Gojo again that he was serious, he needed him as far away from here as possible. Now usually Gojo is the one telling people to get away from him so they don't get caught in the crossfire. But for someone to call him a hindrance for being there, it's kind of funny. Gojo would chuckle as he said he understood, and he would teleport to a mountaintop far away from that area, as he would watch on and he would watch this fight from afar. Yuji would get ready to fight, but Jogo would stop him. Jogo would ask him if he wanted to live in a world where it was strictly power-based. He would no longer be persecuted for being strong, and he no longer had to hide anything. He could be dominant over everything. He could live in the world of the curses as a god. All he had to do was join him. Yuji would obviously decline this, and he would tell Jogo to quit his yapping and start fighting, or he was just going to one-tap him. Jogo saw it was very clear that Yuji could not be tempted onto their side, so he obviously had to be executed. So he would summon his explosive insects, and he would shoot them toward Itadori. But Itadori would see with his Rinnegan that these were merely decoys that were going to explode upon impact. So Itadori would summon some cursed rods. This is a name that I got from someone in my comments section. And he would send the metal rods toward the insects, hitting all the insects, and they would explode. The smoke would clear, and Jogo did not see Itadori anymore. He would look to his left as he would catch a kick to the side. and this kick had so much mass behind it that it actually made Jogo spit up some blood and be sent flying across the lake. Jogo would quickly get up, and he would realize that that kick had no cursed energy behind it. It wasn't a black flash or anything. That was just raw physical strength. And this is what frightened Jogo. If Itadori could summon that much power with one kick, without cursed energy, what could he do with it? Jogo would get up as he was still winded, and he would see Itadori had already closed the distance between them. And Jogo knew he had to end this fight as quickly as possible. Jogo would have to take this fight as serious as possible, and he would have to pull out all the stops in order to kill Itadori or just escape. So Jogo would summon 2 volcanoes on each side of Itadori, and they would blast fire at him. Itadori would put his hands up as he would begin to absorb the fire with little difficulty. But this attack was not meant to actually hurt Itadori, it was just a diversion. As then the volcanoes would disappear and they would stop shooting fire at Itadori, but Itadori would hear Jogo mutter something. And that would be Domain Expansion, Coffin of the Iron Mountain. As then a black barrier would spread over Jogo and Itadori. The walls and the ground would turn into rock as streams of lava would form on the ground. The atmosphere would shift as well as it would become ridiculously hot. It was much like the inside of a volcano. Jogo would then try to attack Yuji just like he did to Gojo and Kanon. But Yuji was unfazed by the domain expansion and this attack, and he would put his hand up using an almighty push to blast the attack away. In fact, the almighty push was so condensed and controlled it would even cause the inside of the domain expansion to crack. Now this is very uncommon as domain expansions are strongest inside, and they usually break and get destroyed from the outside, so for one to get damaged from the inside, that's very impressive. This would leave Jogo shook as most sorcerers and most things in general are burned alive by his domain expansion in seconds. But for someone to withstand his domain expansion for this long and also damage it from the inside, it's too much for him to handle. So Jogo was getting kind of nervous and he was losing hope in even beating Itadori, so he was thinking about running. But he would snap back to reality as Itadori would begin to speak. Itadori would tell Jogo if he was going to fight like that, he would also play along. He would follow this up by saying he probably didn't need this in order to overpower Jogo's domain, so he would hold back a bit. As then the quiet cold words would fall onto Jogo's ears as he would hear Itadori say, "Domain expansion. 6 paths collide." Yuji would clasp his hands together and darkness would begin to spread from his feet. The giant lake that they were on would turn black and the entire forest surrounding them would turn black. In fact, the domain almost hit Gojo, but he was just out of the range. And that just goes to show you how big this domain can get while Yuji is still holding back. But the entire forest ground would be covered in shadows along with the lake. As from behind Yuji, a larger version of the King of Hell would emerge from the shadowy lake. As its mouth would open and it would begin to shoot out purple flames. Some of these flames would actually land on Yuji's foot, but he would be unfazed by this. He would not be getting burned by them. As in, Jogo would look to the side of him and he would see the flames and he would reach out and try to touch them. Since they were apparently harmless as he saw with Yuji, he thought he could touch the beautiful purple flames. But as soon as his finger touched the flames, he was burned. He would pull his hand away as he tried to use reverse curse technique to heal his hand. But this did not work. He would try to form an attack to shoot it at Yuji, but this also did not work. Jogo would understand that he could not use cursed energy at all while inside of this domain. By this time, Jogo's domain would completely shatter and be crushed, as it could no longer stay formed because it was just simply being dominated by Yuji's. And also, all of Jogo's cursed energy is being absorbed the moment it is emitted. As then, Jogo would lay his eyes on how big this domain truly was. Jogo would also notice that this was an open domain with no barrier. So that already put it above the rest and made it more defined than most. Jogo would turn around to see 2 giant Shikigami being summoned. One would be a dog as it had the same eyes as Itadori, and it also had a piercing through the brim of its nose. The other animal was a giant rhino, which also had a piercing through the brim of its nose and also had the same eyes as Itadori. These 2 Shikigami would begin to surround Jogo, as Jogo would begin to lose it and he kind of accepted that this is where he was going to die. He could not outrun this domain as it was too big. There was no way in hell he could beat Itadori in hand-to-hand. and he couldn't even use his own curse technique here. He was doomed. Jogo would ask in a very tired and almost irritated voice what type of domain was this. Itadori would explain to Jogo that this domain was unbeatable. It utilized all 6 abilities of his Rinnegan at once. He could summon an infinite amount of unkillable Shikigami. The purple flames being emitted from the King of Hell healed him and did damage to anyone that he chose. That is why he was not affected by them, but Jogo was harmed by them. He could also summon an unlimited amount of cursed rods of all shapes and sizes, Omega Paws. He could also form mechanized weapons anywhere in the domain. Also, any cursed energy, even if it's eternal like the reverse curse technique, will be absorbed upon usage. Also, his gravity manipulation was heightened to an insane extent. But last but certainly not least, his soul manipulation. Anyone within his domain could have their soul taken at any time, anywhere, as long as they were in his domain. He did not have to touch them at all. If they were in his domain, he could take their soul and all their information. This also doubled over as Yuji's direct hit from the moment he popped it. Much like with Gojo, he overloads people's brain with information with Unlimited Void. That is his instant direct hit. Yuji's direct hit is to snatch anyone's soul inside of his domain the moment it is popped. Yet he chose not to do this with Jogo because he didn't want to end this fight that fast. But Itadori would ensure Jogo that he was not going to use this domain, as he did not need to, and that would kind of ruin everything. As then Itadori would release his domain, and the shadows on the lake and the entire forest would dissipate, and the King of Hell would go back into the ground along with his Shikigami. The atmosphere would clear, and Jogo finally had a shred of hope of surviving. Jogo could now use the last bit of his cursed energy to maybe end this fight or at least get away. As Jogo would hop away and Yuji would ready himself, Jogo would slam his hands together as he would yell out, "Maximum Meteor." I think that's the name of it at least. As a giant flaming meteor about the size of 2 or 3 buildings would be summoned and it would begin to fall toward Itadori. Itadori would tell Jogo that he should have been using attacks like this from the very beginning. As then Itadori would point his finger up. As he would begin to use his gravity manipulation, he would stop the meteor from falling. Itadori would then point his finger at Jogo, and the meteor would begin to fall toward Jogo. Also, it just occurred to me that I might have accidentally called Jogo Gojo. Sorry, their names are very similar. It's literally just backwards. But as the meteor started to fall toward Jogo, he would turn around and start bolting off the lake, and he would try to get away from here as fast as possible. As Yuji would put his hands together, he would begin to form some type of attack, as he would mutter to himself that he took inspiration from Gojo with this one. As with one hand, he would use Almighty Push, and with the other, he would use Universal Pull. As this convergent and divergent power clashed, it would form a purple spear in Yuji's hands. He would open up his hands, and he would aim this directly at Jogo and the meteor that was about to hit him. As then Yuji would whisper the words, "God's Impact," before a ginormous explosion would be let off toward Jogo and the meteor. And this wasn't actually just toward them, this kind of hit the entire forest and the entire lake. As the night sky was consumed with a white light, as pretty much an atomic bomb was just let off. This is obviously inspiration from Hollow Purple. But as the light and the smoke would clear, the meteor would be completely destroyed, along with like half of the forest and half of the lake. In fact, there was only a crater left, and this crater was about the size of the lake. Yuji would appear inside of the crater as he would see someone crawling away. This was obviously Jogo. As Jogo, with his actual god tier plot armor here, would actually make it slightly out of the blast before it hit. Keyword there, slightly, as he was still hit by this blast and he was about to fucking die. Itadori would be walking toward the dying Jogo as he was about to take his soul and get the information out of him so he could at least figure out who he worked for. But suddenly a cursed spirit in the form of a dragon would snatch Jogo up and it would rip him in half, killing him. The dragon would try to get out of there, but before it could, it would have the back of its neck grabbed. As Itadori would drag the dragon down to the ground, and it would begin to drag the dragon across the ground. A lot of drags there, sorry. Itadori would morph his arm into a giant mechanized blaster as he would aim it at the dragon's head point blank and he would fire. He would blow off the dragon's head and he would kill it, as this cursed spirit dragon was sent by none other than Geto or Kenjaku. He sent it to kill Jogo before he got his soul taken, and the plan was completely ruined. as Hanami and Geto were watching this fight the entire time. Itadori would use his Rinnegan and he would sense them out and he would look up straight at them. They were too far away to be seen as they were all the way up on a mountaintop. But Geto and Hanami would immediately leave as they did not want to get caught up with Gojo and Itadori. Jogo was unfortunately exorcised before he could get his soul taken, so the plan is still secure. Itadori and Gojo would meet back up as Itadori would explain to Gojo that the volcano guy was likely working with someone, and they had him silenced or killed so he could not spill any information. That means they likely know about the abilities of the Rinnegan. Itadori would head back to Jujutsu Tech as a couple of days would pass, as the exchange event was slowly approaching. Also, really quick, I want to apologize for that Jogo fight lasting for like 10 minutes plus. Also, some people might be questioning on how Itadori just pulled out a domain expansion that powerful despite only having like 2 weeks of training. And the simple answer is he has all of Sukuna's experience of Jujutsu. And Sukuna knew literally everything about Jujutsu, and all of that information is now in Yuji's hands. Along with the fact Yuji is a complete prodigy at literally anything he does, it's not that hard for him to develop a domain expansion within that time. Plus, he's been sparring with Gojo, and he's had Gojo's help. But Itadori had just got done training as he was wandering around campus, and he was trying to get a drink from the vending machine. Here is where he would run into Nobara and Megumi. This is the first time he saw them in like 3 weeks. Despite this, he would pay them pretty much no mind, but they would pay plenty of mind to him, as he looked like almost a different person now. Of course, he was still wearing his sunglasses to cover up his Rinnegan, but besides that, everything was different. His hair was longer, he was visibly taller, his shoulders were much wider, and he was much more muscular. He kind of looked like Toji. And all of this happened within the span of like 3 weeks. Itadori would get his drink from the vending machine as he was about to leave, but Nobara would try to say hi to him. But she would be cut off by someone yelling, "Stop right there." Megumi and Nobara would turn and they would see Todo and Mai. Itadori, on the other hand, would not turn and he would continue walking back to his training room. But that's when Todo would yell Yuji's name. And finally, this would cause him to stop and turn around as he was very visibly annoyed at Todo. Yuji's sunglasses would slip slightly down, revealing his Rinnegan, and his eyes would cut directly toward Todo and Mai. Megumi and Nobara would immediately notice that Yuji's Rinnegan no longer had its purple lustrous glow. In fact, it was gone, and his Rinnegan seemed much darker. His eyes were now not as wide, in fact they were much sharper, making him look much more intimidating. He would ask Todo in a very gruff voice what exactly he wanted. And Todo would be a little shook and he wouldn't say anything. Mai would also be a little intimidated and she would only question if this was really a first year. As then suddenly Todo would turn around and begin to leave as he was followed by Mai. As Todo would whisper to himself that this exchange event was by far going to be the most interesting, as this was the first time Mai had ever seen Todo pass up a very obvious fight. But an entire month would pass and it was 1 week until the exchange event began. And a lot of stuff would happen with Yuji in this 1 month, as he was dispatched on many missions and he would exercise many cursed spirits, mostly first grades, and through the pure recommendation of Satoru Gojo, he would obtain the rank of special grade sorcerer. And also, of course, Yuji would get even stronger within this 1 month, as Yuji and Gojo's sparring sessions would continue, but they were becoming less frequent, as the gap between them in strength was actually closing very quickly. As a month prior to this, Yuji could push Gojo to almost being serious, if not that, then actually being serious. He would force Gojo to use his curse technique to the maximum, and he would even force him to pull out domain expansions sometimes. But now, in their latest sparring sessions, Itadori would actually force Gojo to be as serious as he possibly could be. Gojo would go all out, and Yuji wouldn't even receive a scratch. In fact, Yuji would force Gojo on the defensive in most of their sparring sessions at this point, and that's the only way Gojo could hold up. As the two sparred, Itadori would begin to replicate Gojo's speed and strength before eventually surpassing it. He would also continue to learn from Gojo's hand-to-hand combat as he would mix it with Sukuna's, and he would surpass Gojo in hand-to-hand combat as well. Even Gojo's Reversal Red, Lapse Blue, and Hollow Purple were all rendered useless as he could simply just absorb them or neg them with his gravity manipulation. And I've already been over this, but Infinity is not viable against Yuji as he can simply just absorb it. And also at this point, Yuji, using Sukuna's memories, has obtained Reverse Curse Technique and Domain Amplification. And even if Gojo pops his Domain Expansion Unlimited Void, it's very unlikely he will get his instant hit off, as Yuji using his Advanced Perception will likely see this coming, and he can use Domain Amplification to neg Gojo's instant hit, meaning the overload of information will not even touch Yuji. And then if Yuji tries to clash domains with Gojo, Gojo will undoubtedly lose that clash, as Yuji's domain, which can engulf an entire city, absorbs any cursed energy that is inside it, so it would quite literally just rip apart Gojo's domain. And also, since it's an open domain, it can attack Gojo's domain from the outside, destroying it. Also, Yuji's domain just gives him so many more advantages than Gojo's. And also, Yuji has learned a lot from fighting a full-power, all-out serious Gojo. Itadori's battle IQ has been raised tremendously, and he also knows how to adapt to things extremely fast now. And since he's been going out on missions and sparring with Gojo, he has a lot more combat experience. And by this time, Gojo would acknowledge that he was no longer the strongest. And yes, I know some people might be mad that Yuji is drastically stronger than Gojo now. And you just have to understand that the Rinnegan is extremely broken with or without verse equalization. And in this case, it has verse equalization, and because of that, it completely dominates inside of the JJK verse. Like, genuinely, there is not a thing anyone in the verse can do against the Rinnegan. Especially when it is in the hands of Yuji Itadori, someone with all of Sukuna's memories and experience, and someone who is, and just spoiler alert, someone who is half cursed spirit and can adapt physically extremely fast. Not to mention, he's being trained by Gojo. Yuji is literally built up to be the strongest. There is no reason why he should not be the strongest. But I hope that clears everything up. I know it won't. I know there's somebody that's still going to be mad, but whatever. Yuji would be dispatched on another mission, but this time it was with a grade 1 sorcerer, Nanami. They were sent to investigate the murder of 3 teenagers at a movie theater. Now, Gojo would have introduced Nanami to Yuji beforehand, and the two's interactions would be a little different from canon, considering Yuji is a completely different person from canon. And their interactions wouldn't be anything special. In fact, they would barely talk to each other, as both of them really don't prefer to work with others. In fact, they're kind of similar to each other. But Nanami and Yuji would get on scene as they would begin to investigate. The two would notice that the bodies were extremely disfigured and discolored. Yuji would touch one of the bodies and he would use his soul manipulation, and he would feel that the soul had been tampered with. It had been changed or damaged. From here, Nanami and Yuji would head up to the rooftop following the footsteps. Here they would find 2 cursed spirits, like in canon, and they would both begin to rush at Yuji. Yuji would then flick his finger at one of them and he would say universal collapse, as a dark orb would be shot at one of them from Yuji's finger. As this black orb would hit one of the quote-unquote cursed spirits, it would immediately blow a hole through it, as then the rest of its body would begin to get ripped apart and pulled in at the middle, as this attack, which is called universal collapse, is just a condensed version of universal pull, so it's pretty much just a little black hole. But this cursed spirit would continue to get pulled in until there was absolutely nothing left of its body. But while that was happening, the other one would rush at Yuji, and he would simply coat his fist in cursed energy, and he would punch a hole right through its chest, killing it. As then Yuji would quickly realize something that he did not realize initially. The cursed spirit that he just punched through the chest actually was wearing a watch. Yuji would touch the cursed spirit's body, feeling its soul, and he would realize that this was no cursed spirit at all. This used to be a human. So in that sense, Yuji had just killed 2 humans. Yuji would explain what just happened to Nanami, and Nanami would tell Yuji that this was not his fault, he was simply deceived. But Yuji would see this as his fault, as he simply could have avoided this just by examining the situation much more carefully. As in, a burning, untamable hatred would begin to grow inside of Yuji. Nanami would stop paying attention for 3 seconds to make a phone call to Shoko. Nanami would turn around as Yuji was gone. As now Yuji was tracking down the person who did this, as he was following traces of their cursed energy that was left behind. Eventually, Yuji would find himself down in the sewer. As over with Mahito, the person responsible for doing all of that at the movie theater, obviously, would feel something creeping up on him. Something dangerous, something very terrifying. As he would look over to see something emerging from the darkness of the sewers. All he would see was two purple glowing eyes, as Yuji had already removed his sunglasses. And Mahito, for the first time in his very short-lived life, he would feel a new emotion. And this emotion was pure fear. As Itadori slowly got closer to Mahito, every cell in Mahito's body was telling him to run. So he would follow his instincts as he would leap up as he was trying to run away, but suddenly he would be snatched from where he stood. Yuji would use Universal Pull as he would rip Mahito toward himself, and he would also rip up some of the ground around Mahito. As Mahito got close to Itadori, Itadori would slam a very powerful black flash into his stomach. And this would blow off like half of Mahito's torso. This would also send him flying back through a pillar and slamming down into the ground. Mahito would use his curse technique and his natural regeneration ability to try to heal himself, but before he could, he would look up and see Itadori already standing over him. Mahito's stomach would heal just on time as he would convert his legs into deer legs much like in canon, and it would cause him to spring up faster. Because obviously Mahito can modify his body with his curse technique to become stronger, faster, or more agile. Mahito would then turn his hand into a blade and he would try to swipe at Yuji. But just as he did this, his arm would be immediately ripped off of his body. As then Mahito would be stabbed in his chest and his stomach by two cursed rods. As then Itadori would put his hand up slowly and he would say almighty push as he would blast Mahito and all of their surroundings away. Since Mahito was blasted point blank, his body would be shattered and he could barely move. The only reason he survived this was because Itadori is not going all out, and also he's a special grade. Mahito would just barely squirm out from underneath the rubble, as the first thing he would see was Itadori staring directly at him. He knew that this had to be the end for him, there was no way of escaping. As he would stare into Itadori's eyes, he would finally understand who he was. This was the guy that Geto warned him about, this was the same guy that killed Jogo. And Geto strictly reminded him that he should stay away from Itadori as he was clearly not going to join them and he was way too strong to fight. At this point, Mahito can't even use his curse technique because his cursed energy is being blocked out by the cursed rods that are still stabbed inside of him. And also, since he was hit point blank by an almighty push, he has almost all of his bones in his body broken. Almost all of his organs are failing and he is missing a leg. So he cannot heal himself, he cannot fight back, he can do nothing. Now, unfortunately for Mahito, this is when he is first introduced, and at this point in time, he is not all that strong, so he couldn't really fight back even if he wanted to. So, by all means, this is not Shibuya Mahito, and anyways, even if this was Shibuya Mahito, he would get absolutely set down by this version of Itadori. As at this current time, Itadori is in fact the strongest, he's even stronger than Gojo. But right as Itadori was about to finish off Mahito, he would hear Nanami call out to him from behind. Itadori had to be extremely lost in his anger as he couldn't even sense Nanami coming toward him. But now he had snapped back to his senses, he sensed something else with his Rinnegan. It was two more cursed energy signatures other than Nanami's and Mahito's. One was behind him with Mahito, and the other was quickly approaching Nanami. As then Nanami would be sidelined and completely blitzed by Geto. Itadori would see Geto throw a punch toward Nanami and it had a lot of cursed energy behind it, so it was going to cause a lot of damage to Nanami. So without a single second to waste, Itadori would blitz toward Nanami and Geto. And Itadori would notice that Geto, or Kenjaku, was extremely fast. And his speed almost rivaled his own, although big emphasis on almost. And because Kenjaku was so fast and about to hit Nanami with a probably killing blow, he did not have time to counterattack. All he could do was move Nanami out of the way. Nanami was completely oblivious to what was happening as he was completely perception blitzed by Itadori and Kenjaku. Itadori would grab Nanami as he would jump back away from Kenjaku. As soon as he looked back though, Kenjaku was gone, and so was Mahito. Even the cursed spirit that he was able to sense but he never seen behind him with Mahito was also gone. And if you're a little confused, allow me to explain what happened. Kenjaku used Nanami as a diversion, while the other cursed spirit that was behind Itadori was actually Dagon. Now, if you don't know who Dagon is, if you're an anime only, you're about to find out in the Shibuya arc. He is the fourth disaster curse, and his whole curse technique and whole thing is kind of around the water or the sea. But the moment Itadori lost focus and went to save Nanami, Kenjaku jumped over to Dagon and Mahito, and Dagon popped his domain expansion, pulling the two inside. And the thing about Dagon's domain expansion is it creates an entire pocket dimension for the user, meaning it will teleport Dagon and whoever he wants to his domain expansion, and it is not visible or traceable from the outside. But now that Kenjaku, Mahito, and Dagon were all safe inside of Dagon's domain, Kenjaku would look down at Mahito as Mahito was on the verge of death. Kenjaku would apologize to Mahito for this, but he would rest his hand on his head and he would tell him that his sacrifice would lead to their victory. As then, Kenjaku, using Geito's technique, would absorb Mahito, absorbing his soul, his curse technique, and his whole being. But outside of the domain with Nanami and Yuji would be scouring the sewers, as he would also scour above and he would not be able to find anything. He would piece together that it was all part of a plan, and he would think that it was some type of teleportation technique, as there was no trace of the three's cursed energy signatures anywhere. They just up and vanished. A few days would pass as the end of the week would come, and it was time for the exchange event or the goodwill event. And also, side note for anyone wondering, Junpei and his mom were never killed like in canon. That's just a little positive note. It was the day of the exchange event, as Yuji would be sitting in his room and all he could think about was the incident that happened on his last mission. How he let his anger overcome him, and because of that he let 3 special grades escape. 2 of them were definitely cursed spirits, and the one that was going to attack Nanami, he couldn't decide if he was a cursed spirit or a human, as his body and his appearance had that of a human, but his soul was definitely a cursed spirit. Although then again, he couldn't particularly place his finger on it. It felt like the soul did not match the body when it came to this man. And also, Yuji, using his sensory abilities, could sense that there was something strange going on with the man's brain. Yuji would see that he was going to be late, so he would grab his jacket and he would leave. Over at the meeting spot with Tokyo and Kyoto's group, Gojo and the principals would have already shown up, and they were asking where the final member of the Tokyo team was, Yuji Itadori. Gojo would tell the principals and Orihime that Itadori should be showing up shortly. As just then, Itadori would make it all the way up the stairs to the Tokyo group with his overwhelming presence, and this presence would attract everyone there, as even Kyoto would stop paying attention to their gifts that were given to them by Gojo to look at Itadori. His presence was very unsettling for everyone there, even his own teammates. Kyoto would be extremely nervous, as Yuji was now deemed a special grade and everyone there knew about it. With that said, that put him on the same level as Satoru Gojo, or Yuki, or Yuta Akotsu. Principal Yaga would explain the rules of the exchange event, as then he would say that it would commence at noon. The Kyoto and Tokyo group would split up and they would go their ways, as they would prep for the first stage. Since the Tokyo group had been training with each other for 2 months, they had also been strategizing with each other. And their strategy didn't really include Yuji, so they did not know how to tie him in with everything. So Panda would ask Yuji what he was good at, and Yuji would tell him that he was good at pretty much everything. Anything he needed done, he could do in a split second. In fact, if they wanted him to, he could go out and kill the cursed spirit and end the first stage immediately. And on top of that, he could completely rip apart the Kyoto team while he was at it. It wouldn't even take him a minute. Maki would tell him that that was actually a good idea. If he started picking apart the Kyoto team, it would be very easy for them to eliminate the cursed spirit and win the first stage of the exchange event. Maki would then say if he wanted, they could help. Itadori would cut her off in the middle of her sentence, as he would say it was fine, he could destroy the team by himself. All they had to do was find the cursed spirit and exorcise it. Although if they started to take too long, he would go kill it himself. As now it was time for the first stage to begin, and Kyoto and Tokyo's group would meet outside on opposite ends of the forest. But before that happened, Maki would ask Yuji one more question, and that was how he got the rank of special grade without recommendations. Since the only person possible that could get him special grade ranking was Gojo, and Gojo is not allowed to recommend his own students. Yuji would explain that he did not obtain the ranking over time, it was his first rank ever. Much like with Yuta, he obtained special grade rank right off the bat. And this is because of Principal Yaga. Since Yuji came up out of the blue, out of nowhere, he held off on giving him a ranking until he exercised the special grade at the penitentiary. And then as he progressed through his training about a month later, he obtained the rank of special grade. And yes, I am only putting this in here to clear up a plot hole. Because earlier I said he obtained special grade ranking through the recommendation of Gojo. That is not possible, as Gojo can't recommend his own students like I said. But as this was happening, somewhere else on Jujutsu High school grounds would be Kenjaku, Hanami, and Dagon. They were also accompanied by 4 humans. 2 of them just being Kenjaku's underlings, and another one would be an old lady with an extremely powerful curse technique. And also her grandson. Now Kenjaku would have already broken into the inventory and stolen the 3 remaining fingers that Jujutsu High had. As then Kenjaku would tell his underlings to bring the bodies. As then they would drag over 3 unconscious people. 1 of them was a woman and 2 of them were males. Kenjaku would then extend his hand as he would touch all 3 of them. Now Kenjaku was saving this for later in his plan, but his plan needed to be modified simply because Yuji Itadori existed. And he stood in the way of everything. As then Kenjaku would use idol transfiguration on the 3 bodies. He would change them to suit the new inhabitants. After they would change, he would slip a cursed object into the woman's mouth. Pause. She would swallow it, pause, and she would open her eyes. This woman would have black hair, and she would also have it in a ponytail. Kenjaku would greet this woman as the ancient sorcerer Yahirozu. As in, Kenjaku would do the exact same thing to one of the male bodies. He would feed one of them a cursed object. He would wake up, and this male would have yellow eyes, white hair, and his hair would be tied up strangely. He would have 2 buns on each side of his head. Kenjaku would then stand up as he would greet this man as Kashimo. As both Yahirozu and Kashimo would question Kenjaku on where Sukuna was. He would tell both of them that he was in their reach, but they simply needed to do one thing. And that was kill Yuji Itadori. He was very strong, but he was the reason that Sukuna could never return at full strength, as he had in his possession the last 3 remaining pieces of Sukuna's soul. If he was killed, Sukuna's soul would return to his body and he would be at full strength. This was great for both of them to hear, since Kashimo wants to fight Sukuna at full strength and kill him, and Yahirozu wants Sukuna to be back at full strength because she kind of has this thing for Sukuna. Now obviously neither of them know each other's motives, as that could cause conflict. Kenjaku would warn the 2 once again that Yuji Itadori was extremely strong, so fighting him one-on-one and winning was nearly impossible. They could try, but they would die. Kenjaku would describe Itadori as a taller, younger-looking guy with pink hair, as he also had deep, dark purple eyes with rings in them. Both Kashimo and Yahirozu immediately knew what this meant. This boy they had to kill was a Rinnegan wielder. Lightning would begin to twitch around Kashimo, as he had always yearned to fight someone with the Rinnegan, as one who wielded the Rinnegan was deemed as a god. The one who wielded the Rinnegan originally lived in Yahirozu's era, the Heian era, but she never came across him. She only heard stories, and it was terrifying, as his strength was immense and unbeatable. But her fear was overcome by her love for Sukuna. And Kashimo came here ready to fight Sukuna, but now he's ready to fight this kid with the Rinnegan. And then Sukuna after. As in, Kenjaku would nod his head at the old woman, as she would sit down right next to her grandson, and she would use her curse technique. And it has been a very long time since I've read Shibuya, I'm gonna be honest. So I'm not entirely sure how her curse technique works, but I know what it does. Granny Origami would begin to pray, that being the old lady's name, but she would begin to pray, like I said, and as she prayed, her grandson's facial features would begin to shift. As she continued to pray and use her sacred technique on her grandson's hair would turn black. As his hair would become very messy, a scar would form on the right side of his mouth. As Granny Origami's grandson was transformed into Toji Fushiguro. As then Kinjaku would pull out the inverted spear of heaven, which he also stole from the Jujutsu High inventory. He would toss it toward Toji as Toji would extend his hand and snatch it out of the air. And unlike with Kashimo and Yaharozu, Toji was like a wild rabbit animal. He had no morals, he didn't make a contract with Kinjaku to be brung back, he was just forcefully brung back. He was just there to do whatever he wanted. But while that was happening, Kashimo and Yaharozu would have already left to look for Itadori. As Toji would stand up and he would jump off the rooftop, blitzing into the woods, as Toji could smell something. As he smelt malice and darkness, but most of all, he smelt strength. And the person he is smelling out is none other than Yuji Itadori. But back on the rooftop with Kinjaku, Granny Ogami would tell Kinjaku that she completely lost control of her technique. Toji Fushiguro's soul would not release from the body until he was killed. Kinjaku would smile maniacally as then he would lean down to the third body that he transfigured, but this one he transfigured with the utmost care. He made sure it was perfect. As then he would pull out all 17 of Sukuna's fingers, and he would begin to feed each one to this body. As finally Sukuna would open his eyes. As this body was modified especially for Sukuna. This body had 2 faces and 4 arms. His hair looked similar to Yuji's, much like in canon, and he was much taller, much like in canon. Sukuna would then say it had begun, but then he would question Kinjaku on where his other 3 fingers were. Kinjaku would tell Sukuna that the fragments of his soul would be returning to him shortly and he would be returned to his prime self. But he had something to make up for it in the meantime. As then Hanami would carry Sukuna's corpse over. Kinjaku would tell Sukuna if he ate his old corpse, it would make up for 2 or 3 of his lost fingers. Sukuna would smile as he would reach over and he would grab his old, rotten, decaying corpse. As much like in the manga, he would eat his own corpse to obtain more power. As now, this is pretty much a Heian-era Sukuna, which is about 19 to 20 fingers strong. Sukuna would sit down as he would peer over the forest as he would begin to watch. As then Kinjaku would remove the prison realm from his pocket as him, Hanami, and Dagon would all leave the rooftop. And for anyone wondering, Granny Ogami had already left the rooftop. The only one on the rooftop is Sukuna. Everyone else is preparing to attack. Also, Kinjaku was very careful about this as he had cast a sensory veil over the entire school, meaning no one inside could sense anything on the outside. He also cast an even stronger one over the forest, meaning even Yuji Itadori wouldn't sense anything was happening even with his Rinnegan until things got too close. So now that Kinjaku has essentially assembled the fucking Avengers just to kill Itadori, that is where I will be ending this part of What If Itadori Had the Rinnegan. Now, I apologize deeply for this coming out like 2 weeks after the first part, but I was just really brainstorming on what I could do for this part. And this is what I came up with. I know it's like really outlandish. In fact, it's so outlandish that some people might actually have a problem with it, which I understand. This idea is really out of pocket, but I think it's pretty fun. But leave your thoughts below in the comments, and also tell me if you enjoyed the part. Tell me what you think will happen in the next part. Obviously, my Discord is linked in the description below, and with all that said, see you in the next one.